I was only 7 years old when my stepmother threw me out on the street for taking a single piece of bread. My shaking hands had reached for it after 3 days without food. As I sat on that cold sidewalk, bruised and starving, I never imagined that the well-dressed man walking toward me would change everything. But why did he stop when everyone else just walked by? The gray clouds hung heavy over Berkshire Valley as 7-year-old Michelle sat on the cold sidewalk outside her stepmother's house. Her small hands clutched the torn edge of her thin dress, trying to cover the bruise on her arm. Through the window, she could see her stepbrother Mark eating a sandwich at the kitchen table. Her stomach twisted with hunger, the same hunger that had gotten her thrown out just an hour ago. "I only took one piece," she whispered to herself, tears rolling down her dirty cheeks. The front door was locked. Stephanie had made that clear when she shoved Michelle outside. "Thieves don't live in my house," her stepmother had screamed. Michelle didn't feel like a thief. She felt like a hungry little girl who missed her father. He had died 2 years ago, leaving her with Stephanie, a woman who had never wanted her. Since then, meals had become a privilege Michelle rarely enjoyed. Stephanie's own children ate 3 times a day while Michelle survived on scraps. The bread had smelled so good this morning, fresh and warm from the oven. Michelle had only wanted to taste it to feel full for once. Now she sat alone, watching people walk by without seeing her. Thomas Mitchell adjusted his tie as his driver pulled up to the coffee shop on Berkshire Valley's main street. The millionaire businessman had built his fortune through hard work, but he never forgot what it felt like to be hungry. As he stepped out of his car, something caught his eye. A small girl sat huddled against a building, her clothes torn and dirty. Most people walked past without noticing, but Thomas stopped. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of himself 40 years ago. "Hello there," he said gently, kneeling down to her level. Michelle looked up, startled. Adults usually ignored her. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, noticing how thin she was. Michelle shook her head slowly. "I can't go home," she whispered. "I took some bread because I was hungry, and my stepmother said I'm a thief." Thomas felt his heart tighten. He saw the bruise on her arm, the hunger in her eyes. "When did you last eat a real meal?" he asked. Michelle thought hard. 3 days ago, Mark dropped some chicken on the floor, and I ate it when no one was looking. The words hit Thomas like a punch. This child was being starved in plain sight. "What's your name?" Thomas asked softly. "Michelle," she replied, her voice barely audible. Thomas noticed how she kept glancing at the house behind her, fear flickering in her eyes. "Michelle, I'm Mr. Mitchell. Would you like to come with me to get something to eat? You look cold and hungry." Michelle's eyes widened. No one had offered her food in so long, but Stephanie had taught her not to trust strangers. I shouldn't," she stammered. Thomas understood her hesitation. "How about this? We can go right there." He pointed to the coffee shop across the street. "You can see your house from the window. If you want to leave at any time, you can." The mention of food made Michelle's stomach growl loudly. Thomas pretended not to notice, but his jaw tightened. "Please," he said gently. "Let me help you." Michelle looked at the coffee shop, then back at the locked door of her stepmother's house. Stephanie wouldn't let her back in anyway. Slowly, she nodded. Thomas helped her stand, noticing how she winced. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Michelle quickly shook her head, but Thomas saw through the lie. His anger toward whoever had done this to her grew, but he kept his voice calm and kind. Inside the warm coffee shop, Michelle's eyes grew wide at the smell of fresh food. Thomas led her to a quiet corner booth where she could see her stepmother's house through the window. "Order anything you want," he told her, handing her the menu. Michelle stared at the pictures of food, overwhelmed. "Anything?" she whispered. Thomas nodded, his heart breaking at her disbelief. When the waitress came, Michelle timidly pointed to a grilled cheese sandwich. And? Thomas prompted gently. That's all, Michelle said quickly. I don't want to be greedy. Thomas turned to the waitress. She'll have the grilled cheese, a bowl of chicken soup, apple juice, and a slice of chocolate cake for dessert. Michelle's mouth fell open. That's too much, she protested. You're a growing girl, Thomas said firmly but kindly. You need proper food. When the meal arrived, Michelle ate slowly at first, as if she couldn't believe it was real. Then hunger took over, and she began eating faster. Thomas watched, his suspicions growing. Michelle, he said carefully, tell me about living with your stepmother. Between bites, Michelle's story poured out. The locked refrigerator, the meals she could only watch others eat, the punishments for being ungrateful. Thomas listened to Michelle's story, his hands clenched under the table. This wasn't just neglect, it was abuse. He thought of his own daughter, safe and loved at home, and couldn't imagine her suffering like this. Michelle, he said when she finished, what you're describing isn't right. Children should never go hungry. Michelle looked down. Stephanie says I cost too much money. She says my father left nothing for my care. Thomas knew that was likely a lie. Do you have any other family? He asked gently. Michelle shook her head. Just Stephanie. She married my daddy when I was 4. Then he got sick. As Michelle ate her chocolate cake, her first dessert in 2 years, Thomas made a decision. He excused himself and stepped outside to make a phone call. Janet, it's Thomas. I need you to contact Child Services immediately. And call Detective Morrison. I have a situation that needs immediate attention. When he returned, Michelle had finished eating. She looked fuller, warmer, but still scared. Michelle, Thomas said carefully, I want to help you. But first, I need to make sure you're safe. Would it be okay if some nice people came to talk to you? People whose job it is to protect children? Michelle's eyes filled with tears. Will I get in trouble? No, sweetheart, Thomas assured her, his voice gentle but firm. You've done nothing wrong. Taking food when you're hungry isn't stealing. It's survival. Within an hour, Detective Morrison arrived with a social worker named Mrs. Garcia. They spoke with Michelle privately while Thomas waited, pacing the coffee shop. Through the window, he watched Stephanie's house, his anger building. How many people had walked past that home without knowing a child was being starved inside? Mrs. Garcia emerged looking grim. Mr. Mitchell, Michelle's given us enough information to act immediately. We're going to the house now. Thomas stood. I'm coming with you. As they approached the house, Stephanie opened the door, her face shifting from annoyance to false concern when she saw the officials. Oh, is Michelle causing trouble? I've been so worried. She ran off after I caught her stealing. Detective Morrison stepped forward. Ma'am, we need to speak with you about Michelle's living conditions. Stephanie's face paled. She's a difficult child. Always lying, always taking things. But her act crumbled when they asked to see Michelle's room, a cramped closet with only a thin blanket on the floor. The locked refrigerator told its own story. Mark and Julie watched from the stairs, confused as their mother was questioned. The evidence was overwhelming. Michelle's room was smaller than most bathrooms. Photos on the walls showed Mark and Julie at restaurants, amusement parks, on vacations. Michelle appeared in none of them. The locked refrigerator had a padlock that Stephanie fumbled to explain. She would eat everything, Stephanie protested weakly. But when Detective Morrison found medical records showing Michelle's weight loss over 2 years, her excuses fell apart. Thomas stood with Michelle on the porch, keeping her from seeing her stepmother being placed in handcuffs. It's going to be okay, he told her, wrapping his jacket around her small shoulders. Mrs. Garcia approached them. Michelle needs somewhere safe to stay while we sort this out. Thomas didn't hesitate. I've already called my lawyer. I want to file for emergency foster placement. My wife and I have been approved foster parents for years. He looked down at Michelle. If you'd like, you can stay with us. We have a big house with a real bedroom for you. And I promise, our refrigerator doesn't have a lock. Michelle looked up at him with wonder. Really? Thomas nodded. Really. And you'll never be hungry again. For the first time in 2 years, Michelle smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. Thomas's house was like something from Michelle's dreams. Not because it was grand, though it was, but because it felt warm. His wife Linda met them at the door, her face kind and welcoming. You must be Michelle, she said softly. I've made up the guest room for you. Would you like to see it? Michelle nodded shyly. The room had a real bed with soft pillows and a warm comforter. There were even toys on the dresser. This is all for me? Michelle asked in disbelief. Linda knelt beside her. Everything in this room is yours, sweetie. And see that door? That's your very own bathroom. Michelle touched the soft bed carefully, as if it might disappear. That night at dinner, she sat at a real table with Thomas, Linda, and their daughter Grace, who was 9. Pass the potatoes to Michelle, Linda said to Grace, who smiled and handed over the bowl. Michelle took a small spoonful. You can have more, Grace said. Mom always makes extra. Michelle looked at Linda uncertainly. As much as you want, dear, Linda assured her. For the first time in years, Michelle ate until she was full. That night, tucked into the soft bed, she heard Thomas and Linda talking quietly in the hallway about permanent placement and adoption lawyers. Stephanie's trial moved quickly. The evidence of abuse and neglect was undeniable. Michelle testified bravely, with Thomas and Linda supporting her. Stephanie received 5 years in prison for child abuse and neglect. Her children, Mark and Julie, went to live with their grandmother, who was horrified to learn how Michelle had been treated. I never knew, she told Thomas after the trial. Stephanie always said Michelle was difficult. I should have looked closer. Meanwhile, Michelle bloomed in the Mitchell house. She gained weight, started school, and made friends. Grace became the sister she'd never had. 3 months later, Thomas and Linda sat Michelle down for an important conversation. Michelle, Linda began, we've loved having you here. Michelle's face fell, fearing they would send her away. Thomas quickly continued, which is why we want to ask if you'd like to stay forever. We want to adopt you. Michelle's eyes filled with tears. Really? You want me? Linda hugged her close. We've wanted you since the day Thomas brought you home. You've made our family complete. Michelle nodded through her tears. Yes, yes, please. 6 months later, Michelle Mitchell stood before a judge, wearing a new dress Linda had bought, especially for the occasion. Is it your wish to be adopted by Thomas and Linda Mitchell? The judge asked. Michelle's voice was clear and strong. Yes, Your Honor, they're my real family. The adoption party was held in the same coffee shop where Thomas had first bought Michelle a meal. The once thin, frightened girl now laughed freely, surrounded by her new family and friends. Detective Morrison stopped by to congratulate them. You saved her life, he told Thomas quietly. Thomas shook his head, watching Michelle play with Grace. She saved mine. I had forgotten what it meant to make a real difference. Mrs. Garcia, the social worker, smiled at the scene. Michelle's case has changed how we look for signs of abuse. Her story will help other children. As the party continued, Michelle stood up, wanting to say something. The room quieted. A year ago, I was hungry and alone, she said, her voice steady. I thought taking bread made me bad, but Mr. Thomas taught me that being hungry doesn't make you a thief. It makes you human, and everyone deserves food, love, and family. She looked at Thomas and Linda. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for making me your daughter. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Michelle ran to hug her parents, finally home. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness, stopping to help a hungry child, can change the world. How many children sit invisible on our streets, waiting for someone to see them? What would you do if you saw a child in need? Sometimes being a hero doesn't require superpowers. It just requires caring enough to stop and help. Tell us in the comments about a time when someone's kindness changed your life. And remember, you might be the miracle someone is praying for today.